Hi, my name is Aurelie Clark. I'm the prop making lecturer at Guildhall and sustainability lead for the production arts course. Julie's Bicycle 2013 highlighted our work should be about a means to move away from an economy that operates on a take, make, dispose approach and more towards an approach to seek, repurpose, reuse, recycle and ensure that it is managed responsibly. Our role is not just to introduce students to new and exciting materials, equipment, tools or techniques. It's to acquaint the student to alternatives or sustainable choices, work with safer materials and be innovative in the concepts they recreate, by being aware of waste disposal and how much is expended during the fabrication process, either by reusing products, adapting or making sure appropriate quantities are measured whilst being conscious of material viability and affordability. As makers, we must also value traditional techniques and simpler processes to enable the student to experiment and make their own informed decisions on what are the best means for the process or project. The aim is to develop them into sustainable practitioners to guarantee theatre and performance are at the leading position of outstanding environmental practice. The Much Ado About Nothing Theatre Green Book production in the Milton Court Theatre enabled us the opportunity to learn, adapt and improve our practices. Working with Jennifer Telfer, the production was minuted and logged, specifically the quantitative data, materials inventory and pre- and post-production meetings and decisions made. We learnt a great deal from the process and post-production review. Here are some insights into what we learned. For example, props. Although not hitting baseline, 95% of the materials were environmentally friendly, non-toxic, biodegradable, recycled and sourced, but the overall carbon footprint of buying in materials and transporting them lowered the score. The reuse percentage was high as it future-proofed the next production. The team felt the inventory did not reward low-impact new materials that were inherently safer to use and could be reused on future shows. This raised the question of should the inventory capture the value of making a better choice even when it's not reused on that particular production, but will affect another. Students reflected on working on the Green Book production and that using sustainable materials did not change the quality, it just changed the process, allowing them to take the time working with them differently.
So I'm Katie and I was the production manager on Much Ado About Nothing.
I'm Rachel Young. I was the staff supervisor for the costume department.
And I'm Liv Fowler. I was the costume supervisor and the wardrobe manager.
I'm Sam and I was the lighting designer on Much Ado.
My name is Pei Wan and I am the set and costume designer on Much Ado About Nothing.
So at Guildhall, we work on a 6-week allocation process. And our work started a lot earlier on, I guess you could say, as we were attending a few meetings, which is usual anyway. But during that process, we would also have to start finding out our sustainability solutions. So there was a bit more organisation involved beforehand, including filling out the materials inventory. And as production manager, I'd have to chase up on each of the departments to make sure that was filled in. I guess another thing that was different from usual shows is I worked very closely with LX and costume, as well as licensing to make sure the dress bags that we used in the show were able to be used afterwards. So we couldn't flambar them if we wanted to use them afterwards in archives. So they're now being reused in the costume department. But that was quite a close relationship that I had with licensing, LX and costume to make sure that we were following a safe procedure around that. And stage management joined in a bit with that. So I think at Guildhall, along with many other organisations, I think it would be, it's quite a common thing that might happen, is it would have been so much easier if everything was catalogued. Our prop stores, I'm sure costume might also say the same thing. anything that was around the theatre as well. If that was catalogued and organised properly, it would have been so much easier to figure out what we've got in stock and what we don't have. For example, when we were actually in the theatre doing our fit-ups, we couldn't find our bungee reusable cable ties, so instead they ended up resorting to LX tape, which is disposable. It's not really that great to use for the theatre green book, and we couldn't find it because it wasn't organised properly. So I felt like that was a massive thing that you could see through each department. So yeah, that was definitely one takeaway that I had. So another takeaway was the fact that we explored where everything was going to after we ended the show. So most of our stock was reused around the building. So the tables that we sourced for the show, they were reused in costume, along with a lot of our stock that was unusable. We then had to find out where the recycling plants were and what they could recycle, what materials they could recycle.
It was interesting because the design was already Green Book focused, so we knew that we weren't going to be able to get exact replicas of what the drawing was, or sort of what the designer had exactly in mind. So it was quite free flowing of what we could find and what suited the performers, and how that all worked was really interesting to see. Kind of the more collaborative side of seeing, like, designing by what we could find almost.
Yeah, and for me it was that all the way through. So from the very early stages, it was talking to the designer and talking to the team around, especially the student production manager, Katie, about where and how we can make that collaboration work from very, very early on. And considering what would happen to stuff before we've even thought about where we're going to get it from, or where we're going to build it, how we're going to build it. And that was a really interesting discussion that we had quite early on about how we were going to get rid of things at the end. For the staffing side of things, it was really interesting to focus on people as opposed to purchasing, which was something that was brought up very early on in one of the meetings. And so we had the set design of the dress bags. So we had white cotton dress bags as a very early idea from Payao about the what would be filling the space. And as soon as we saw those, we thought they'd be a perfect use for those in our costume department to house our archive and to house some of our more delicate pieces within our costume department. We could have gone out and bought those. We could have purchased them brand new from a supplier. Obviously, would have been a huge cost to that, but we decided instead to make those, and we rallied some amazing help from students, some evenings that we had where students volunteered their time and made the dress bags for us, and it means that we've got those as a long-lasting item as part of our archive.
Yeah, I think as a department we were very conscious that it's quite easy to create a lot of electronic waste in lighting through things like LED tape and practicals that are sometimes only usable for one show. So we I creatively tried to find other solutions in terms of finding storytelling devices and visual aids that would mean we could use existing theatre fixtures that have a lifespan that extends far beyond and before Much Ado, rather than creating a huge pile of practicals that would be used once and then never seen again. I think in terms of organisation, it was kind of a very open conversation between me and Ollie, the production electrician, about the resources we'd be using, where we'd be finding our kit, and I was very kind of clear with him from day one that we would be either using in-house equipment or hiring, that we'd like to avoid buying anything that wasn't absolutely necessary to create the lighting for the show, and but the first solution would always be, even before hiring, would be to look in-house, look at other venues. And then when it did come to hiring, because we did hire some fixtures for the show, we made sure we hired them from a local London-based supplier who used like ULEZ compatible vehicles rather than kind of going further afield. So that was kind of where it came into the more logistical side of my role on the show. I think that only the way, from a lighting point of view certainly, Green Book standards are met or looked at feels like it needs more looking at. And I think if we want a really robust, genuinely climate conscious approach to making theatre, more consideration needs to be given to things like power calculations and how the wider building is run, because actually, yes, the lights draw a lot of power, but so does HVAC and water heating and ambient lights for, you know, the foyers and stuff. And that stuff is almost always on much, much longer than the theatre lights. So it feels like there needs to be a category alongside lighting and that power draw and how that affects the environment, to think about how a building is built and how it is run and how it is maintained, because I'm sure some of these old West End theatres must be incredibly badly insulated and all of that sort of thing. And that, I think, in the long term, in a much bigger picture of everything, has much more impact on the environment than one show. I think that will be kind of what makes the difference between theatre pieces being sustainable and theatre as an industry moving towards more sustainability.
Chelsea and I spent, I think, around a week or two to kind of analyze the script, and that's kind of the first step. We need to get to know each other, and we need to get to know what the visual language and what kind of frame that we wanted to build up for this specific production. And we are fully aware of that, the existence of Theatre Green Book and how to follow it, because I think Chelsea is a very experienced director apparently, and she has a lot of experiences working with Theatre Green Book. And in our very early conversations that we've had, we wanted to introduce a lot of elements in, but naturally you would think about, well, is that sustainable? But it's a great thing is that I think we didn't give up on mentioning any objects to the team when we have the meetings here with the production team. Because surprisingly, you will always hear from stage managers or technical managers or production managers saying that actually we could find a sustainable version of this. So yes, we carry the thoughts of we need to follow certain policies in the Theatre Green Book, but as well as I think, as well as having all these supports and knowledges, I think outside of our frame and comes from production team is really helpful to form the design, especially in a very initial stage. I think, well, I guess the key challenges isn't really from the Theatre Green Book. I think the challenges, not for me specifically, but I will say, because such a minimalistic design, it doesn't really require that much, and it's also a no-build show. So it kind of doesn't really require that much materials to be added on top of the design. But I think for props, because we've had 17 masks and needs to be made in such a short of amount of time, that would be a challenge for the student, not specifically for me. And especially, I think they did such an impressive and great job of using and finding that specific material. And it still kind of kept the artistic goal so well, in a sense, is really something that I would say is a challenge to achieve. But I'm very happy with the final outcome that we came up with.
In conclusion, the process aim enabled us to enlighten and introduce sustainable practices on a production, engage and educate ourselves, our suppliers, our customers, students and audiences, an evolving process. Our success on this project came from our students' engagement, which was very high and evidenced by their desire to investigate, learn and work with other departments and hit their targets, something we value and learn from as educators. Our aim to achieve baseline was exceeded and we achieved intermediate level. This exceeded our expectations overall, although hitting this was less impactful than the learning we gained from the experience. Our recommendations were to embed more into the programmes to have the biggest impact, introduction and accountability in the training and through our common practices. Although we have seen developments individually, because this is a key learning criteria in assessment, being able to apply it more into our general practices will become crucial. Since this production, we have increased and organised spaces and storage to enable us to clearly see what we have, make best use of it, and communicate effectively through improved cataloguing. We are introducing 2 new Green Book production builds next term as part of a rolling format, looking at implementing all department suggestions from this experience into the next. It is vital to prepare students for an industry in transition. The students we train today will set the tone and language for the industry's future, and with the high level of intention, understanding and passion seen on this particular show, that future industry will likely be very sustainable indeed.
Hello, my name is Hans-Jörg Schmidt and I'm the program leader of the Production Arts course here at Guildhall. Doing this pilot on the Theatre Green Book production of Much Ado About Nothing was a really brilliant experience for everyone in the department. It really shifted, I think, the way we all think about doing productions here, about the future. I think it's something, as you've heard, the students feel incredibly passionate about, and we were all really surprised at how easy it was in some ways, in terms of people really embracing, changing the ways they're working, the way they think, the way they see themselves within the industry, within the theatre landscape. I think the production itself, what was also really good to see was that the production values, didn't shift or change at all. Production values are a really important aspect of the work at Guildhall, and one of the concerns to start with was whether we would end up with something that had not as high production values as we're used to, but that wasn't the case at all. And I think that had a lot to do with the buy-in from the director and the designer. So we usually work with professional creative teams. So on this one, the director Chelsea Walker and Payao, who you've met, the designer, really were up for doing this. And I think that was a big experience, that we needed that buy-in from very early on. But that meant that really the production was protected, and was in safe hands. And we're really proud of what we've all achieved. Looking forward, we're going to do 2 more pilots, as you've heard, next academic year. One on what's called a non-build show, as with Much Ado, so there's no build scenery. And then a second one on a build show, which includes, the workshops and the build scenery. And then we're planning to, from the academic year 25-26, to have all the productions run towards the Theatre Green Book. That's it. Thank you very much for watching and listening.